I've always had a thing for old buildings. The older, the better. Crumbling brickwork, forgotten hallways, peeling paint. They all tell stories that history books barely skim over. Maybe it's the way time lingers in places like that, caught between the cracks and the rust, whispering secrets that no one's bothered to listen to for years. That's why I couldn't stay away from the Black Hollow clock tower. Everyone in town talked about it like some local legend, a relic from the late 1800s, built by some eccentric clockmaker named Elias Reed. But people didn't tell the same stories about it. Some said he went mad trying to perfect the gears. Others said he disappeared one night, swallowed by the very thing he built. A few insisted that he still lived up there, watching anyone who got too close. They all agreed on one thing, though. The clock doesn't count time like it should. Liv, you're not seriously thinking about going there, my best friend Jules had said when I told her. That place gives people nightmares. I'll be fine, I'd said, shrugging it off. Just a quick look. Jules didn't believe me. Honestly, I didn't believe me either. I wasn't just going for a quick look. I wanted to know, to see the gears, the mechanics, and maybe understand why people were so scared of an old clock. So I went. The clock tower loomed over Black Hollow like a skeleton against the sky. Its silhouette was jagged, its stone worn by decades of wind and rain. The iron gate surrounding it was rusted but still intact. Not that it was much of an obstacle. Just a quick look, I muttered under my breath as I squeezed through a gap in the fence. The air inside the tower felt heavy, like stepping into a room where someone had just been arguing. Dust floated lazily through the dim light filtering through the cracked windows. The wooden staircase spiraled upward, disappearing into shadows. My footsteps echoed as I climbed, each creak of the stairs sending a chill up my spine. First floor, empty, just rotted furniture and debris. Second floor, more of the same, but something felt off. I paused, catching my breath. That's when I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible tick. I froze. My eyes scanned the room, but nothing moved. Okay, Liv, I whispered. It's just an old building. Old buildings make noise. But as I took another step, the sound came again. Tick, louder. My pulse quickened. I followed the sound, feeling my way along the wall until I reached the far end of the room. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a clock face. It was huge, easily 6 feet across, set into the wall like a forgotten monument. The hands were still, but the gears behind it. They were moving, but not forward. They were counting down. My chest tightened, the air around me buzzed softly like static before a storm. No way, I murmured, stepping back. But then I saw them. The dates, scratched into the stone below the clock. Dozens of dates carved by hand, all of them crossed out, except for one. Tomorrow. My heart slammed against my ribs. This isn't happening, I muttered, backing away. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Someone was climbing the stairs. I whipped around, staring at the dark stairwell. The footsteps echoed, growing louder, but no shadow, no figure appeared. Hello? My voice sounded small in the vast emptiness. No response, just footsteps. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the world. I backed up against the wall, my eyes locked on the staircase, closer. Nope, 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 I whispered, inching away. The footsteps stopped. Silence. And then, tick. I turned back to the clock. The countdown had sped up, and I had the sickening feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here when it hit 0. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. God, I tried. But every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. Tick. Soft. Almost polite at first. Then louder, more insistent, like a nail being driven into my skull. And the footsteps. Those footsteps. They echoed in my mind long after I left the tower. Even though I was back in my apartment, curled up under my blankets, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. I kept checking the time. 3:12 a.m., 3:47 a.m., 4:19 a.m. Time crawled. Each minute felt like it was dragging me closer to what? I didn't know, but my gut told me I didn't want to find out. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted. My body screamed for sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut up. I grabbed my phone and Googled everything I could about Elias Reed and the Black Hollow Clock Tower. There wasn't much. A few historical blurbs about how Elias had been a genius clockmaker, obsessed with precision. He built the tower in 1886, but the articles were vague about what happened after that. Missing. Disappeared. No one knew where he went. And the only other thing I found? A Reddit thread. Don't go to the clock tower, the dates are warnings. I clicked on it, heart pounding. User, Black Hollow. Truth. Posted, 3 years ago. People go missing after they see the countdown. You can't stop it. You can't run. If you hear the footsteps, it's already too late. My mouth went dry. Footsteps. I slammed my laptop shut. Nope. I whispered, nope, nope, nope. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Tomorrow. That date scratched into the stone. I told myself I wouldn't go back. But as the day wore on, that ticking grew louder in my mind. It was like a splinter I couldn't pull out, burrowing deeper the more I ignored it. By nightfall, I was standing at the base of the tower again. I'm just gonna look, I whispered, trying to convince myself. The rusted gate groaned as I squeezed through. Tick. The sound echoed softly, vibrating in my bones. I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When I reached the second floor, I froze. Whispers. They drifted through the air, faint but unmistakable. Soft, murmuring voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Who's there? I whispered. The voices stopped. The air grew thick, heavy like a thunderstorm about to break. Hello? Silence. And then, tick. I followed the sound, drawn to the same spot where I'd found the clock before. It was still there. The gears still turned, grinding relentlessly as the hands counted down. And the dates. I shined my flashlight on the stone wall. Dozens of dates, each one scratched deep into the stone, all crossed out, except one. Tomorrow. But now, another date appeared beneath it. My breath caught. The day after tomorrow. What the hell? I whispered. My pulse pounded as I stepped closer, running my fingers over the jagged lines. More dates. Each one scratched deeper, as if someone had been frantic, desperate. Why are they still adding dates? The voices whispered again, barely a breath in my ear. Run! My heart stopped. Footsteps. They were back. But this time, they were faster. I spun around, flashlight shaking as I pointed it toward the staircase. Nothing, but the sound kept coming. Closer. No, I whispered, backing away. My hand brushed the clock, and for a moment the ticking stopped. Silence. And then, the footsteps started running. Straight toward me. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I just ran. My footsteps echoed off the stone walls, but the sound behind me was louder, faster, closer. I stumbled down the stairs, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything but those relentless footsteps chasing me. Get out. My foot hit the last step, and I bolted through the entryway, nearly crashing into the rusted gate. I squeezed through, my jacket tearing on the jagged metal. But I didn't stop. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the street, gasping for air, my heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to break free. Only then did I glance back. The clock tower stood silently against the night sky. No footsteps, no shadows, nothing. But I knew. Something was still inside. I didn't go home right away. I ended up at Jules's apartment, knocking so hard I was surprised I didn't break the door. "Liv?" Jules blinked at me, her eyes widening when she saw my face. "What the hell happened? I need to... I just..." My voice shook. She pulled me inside and locked the door. "Start from the beginning." I tried. I told her about the clock, the countdown, the footsteps that weren't there. But the words felt jumbled, like my brain couldn't piece it together properly. "You're scaring me," she said softly. "Jules, I'm scaring myself." Her eyes darted down to my hand. "Liv, what is that?" I followed her gaze. My wrist. There was a mark, faint but unmistakable, a circular pattern like clock gears. I swallowed hard. That wasn't there before. Jules grabbed my hand, her fingers brushing over the mark. "Liv," she whispered. "What the hell is happening?" I didn't know who else to turn to. After Jules calmed me down, we did what anyone would do when faced with supernatural insanity. We searched the internet. Most of it was useless. Legends, folklore, nothing helpful. But then, the Reddit thread. User, Black Hollow. Truth posted 3 years ago. If you saw the countdown, you're marked. You have until the last date to fix it, or it finds you. I blinked. "Marked," I murmured, staring at the mark on my wrist. "What does that mean?" Jules asked, leaning over my shoulder. "I don't know," I said softly, but I had a sinking feeling I was about to find out. We didn't sleep that night. Jules kept glancing at the door, as if she was expecting something to come crashing through it. I sat on her couch, watching the clock on her wall. 3 a.m. My eyelids grew heavy. Just for a second. Tick. My eyes snapped open. Jules was asleep beside me, but something was wrong. The ticking wasn't in my head, it was in the room. I turned slowly, heart pounding. The mark on my wrist, it was glowing. My breath caught. "No," I whispered. I grabbed my phone, opening the photo I had taken of the scratched dates in the clock tower. The date had changed again. It wasn't just tomorrow anymore, a week from now. "Jules," I whispered, shaking her awake. She blinked groggily. "Liv." "It's moving," I whispered, showing her the phone. Her face paled. "What does that mean?" I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for sure. Time wasn't on my side. We didn't have a choice. "We go back," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jules stared at me like I had lost my mind. "Are you insane?" she hissed. "If we don't figure out what's happening..." I trailed off, glancing at the mark on my wrist. It was darker now. "It's getting worse, Jules." Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes filled with fear. "Then I'm coming with you." "No," I said quickly. "I'm not letting you go alone." We locked eyes, and I knew she wasn't backing down. "Fine," I whispered, "but we don't stay long." I didn't want to go back, but I couldn't ignore it. The mark on my wrist was darker now, angrier almost. I didn't say that part to Jules. She was scared enough already. "Ready?" I asked, though my voice was barely above a whisper. Jules nodded, her jaw tight, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "We go in, we figure out what this is, and we get out," I said. "Fast," Jules added. "Fast," I agreed. The clock tower was waiting for us. The air was thicker this time, heavy with something I couldn't quite explain. It pressed against my skin, made my chest feel tight. The wind had picked up, but it didn't touch the tower. It was like the air inside was different. "This feels wrong," Jules murmured, her voice barely louder than the wind. "I know," I whispered. We stepped inside. The door creaks shut behind us, and the sound echoes like a warning. Footsteps. "Tell me that's you," Jules whispered. "I'm standing still," I breathed. Her eyes darted to mine. We weren't alone. The air buzzed around us, the faint ticking growing louder with every step. "The stairs," I murmured, pointing to the winding spiral that led up to the mechanism. Jules swallowed hard. "Okay," she whispered. We climbed, each step echoing too loudly in the hollow space. The ticking was faster now, closer. When we reached the top, I froze. The gears were turning, not forward, backward. "What the hell?" Jules whispered, her eyes wide. "It's counting down," I murmured. "To what?" "I don't know, but I had a terrible feeling." "Liv," Jules' voice was shaky. I turned. She was staring at the wall, new scratches. They weren't there before. "How?" I trailed off, stepping closer. More dates. Some were old, from years ago, but one was new. Today, 3:45 a.m. "That's less than an hour," I whispered, my throat dry. "Liv, we need to go," Jules whispered, her voice barely holding together. "Wait," I murmured, brushing my fingers over the marks. They were fresh. "Someone did this," I whispered. "Who?" Jules asked. I didn't have an answer. At first, I thought it was the wind, a faint rustling, like leaves brushing against the stone. But it wasn't the wind. It was voices, whispers, too many to count. "Do you hear that?" Jules asked, her voice trembling. "Yeah," I murmured, trying to steady my breathing. The words were too soft to make out, but the urgency was there, a warning echoing through the air. "Get out!" "We need to go," I said, grabbing Jules's arm. But then, the footsteps started again. We turned to run, but the staircase was gone. "What the?" Jules' voice caught in her throat. The stone beneath us shifted. The air grew colder. "Liv," Jules whispered, her grip on my arm tightening. I followed her gaze. The clock face. It wasn't showing the time anymore. It was counting down. 3:44 a.m. "We're out of time," I whispered. Tick. Jules tugged me toward the edge of the platform. "We have to jump," she said, her voice panicked. "What?" My heart pounded. "It's the only way." Tick. "Liv, please." My eyes locked on the countdown. 3:44, 45. "Okay," I whispered, my throat dry. We jumped, but we didn't hit the ground. We should have hit the ground, but we didn't. For a moment, there was nothing, just a weightless, endless drop. My stomach twisted, and I felt Jules's hand gripping mine, her nails digging into my skin. Then, we landed. Software. Too soft. I opened my eyes, blinking in the dim light. It was sand, I murmured, my voice echoing strangely. Jules was beside me, her face pale and streaked with sweat. Where are we?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. We weren't in the sea clock tower anymore. The space around us was vast, an underground cavern stretching further than my eyes could see. The walls were lined with gears, rusted and ancient, clicking and turning in impossible patterns. Time moved differently here. "Liv," Jules's voice was shaky. "I see it," I whispered. In the middle of the cavern stood a pedestal. On it, an ancient clock. But it wasn't like any clock I'd ever seen. Its hands moved erratically, twitching and spinning in opposite directions. "Is that?" Jules trailed off. "I think so," I whispered. "The source." We stepped closer, our footsteps muffled by the sand. As I approached the clock, I felt it, a pulse, like a heartbeat. "Liv," Jules murmured. Her eyes were fixed on the pedestal. I followed her gaze, scratches, names, carved into the stone, worn and ancient. Names of those who came before us. This is where they ended up," I whispered. Jules's eyes filled with tears. "Liv, my name." I looked closer. Her name was there. Mine too. "What the hell is this place?" Jules whispered, her voice barely holding together. My wrist burned. "Ah!" I winced, clutching it. The mark, the symbol, was darker now, almost pulsing with the same rhythm as the clock. "Liv," Jules whispered, her voice laced with panic. I turned. Shadows. They were moving, emerging from the gears, sliding across the cavern like ink spilled across paper. "We're not alone," I whispered. Jules took a step back, her grip tightening on my arm. They were coming. The whispers came next, software urgent. They filled the cavern, echoing off the walls, growing louder with each passing second. "Do you hear that?" Jules whispered. "Yeah," I murmured, my eyes scanning the darkness. The voices were overlapping, but one stood out. "Don't touch the clock." "What?" Jules's voice trembled. "Don't let it reset." The shadows moved closer and the air grew colder. "Liv, we have to go," Jules said, tugging my arm. But I couldn't move. The clock, it was calling me. "Liv, don't." Jules's voice was barely above a whisper now. But I stepped closer. The mark burned hotter. I could feel it, the weight of the clock pulling at me. "We have to stop it," I whispered. "What if stopping it makes it worse?" Jules asked, her voice breaking. I didn't know the answer, but the countdown was almost over. "Liv, please," Jules begged. I looked at her, tears in her eyes, fear etched into her face, but I had to make a choice. My hand hovered over the clock. 3:45 a.m. "Liv." Jules' voice was barely a whisper. The shadows closed in. Tick. I made my choice. Everything went dark. We were falling again. The darkness swallowed us whole, and I felt the air rush past me. My stomach twisted, and for a moment, I thought this was it. This was how it ended. But then I hit the ground, hard. The wind was knocked out of me, and my body screamed in pain. I groaned, trying to catch my breath, and blinked against the dim light. Jules landed beside me, coughing and gasping for air. "Liv?" Her voice was strained, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. I pushed myself up, wincing as every muscle protested. "I'm here," I rasped. My eyes adjusted slowly to the eerie glow around us. We weren't back in the clock tower. The space was wrong. The walls pulsed like they were alive, shifting and stretching like they were breathing. A faint humming filled the air, vibrating through my bones. The ground was cold and damp beneath my hands, but it wasn't stone. It felt softer. "What is this place?" Jules whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I don't know," I murmured, but I could feel it. Whatever this place was, it wasn't meant for us. The shadows moved. I saw them out of the corner of my eye, dark shapes slithering across the walls, blending into the unnatural pulse of the space. I grabbed Jules's hand, pulling her close. "We need to move," I whispered. "Where?" Her voice was tight with fear. I didn't know, but staying here wasn't an option. We stumbled forward, the ground squishing beneath our feet with every step. The air grew heavier, pressing down on us like a weight we couldn't shake. The humming grew louder, almost like a heartbeat, and I felt it vibrating through my chest. "Liv." Jules' voice was barely audible, but I felt her hand tighten around mine. I followed her gaze. The clock was here. It stood in the middle of the space, ancient and wrong. The gears inside it clicked and whirred, but the hands didn't move. They twitched, jerking back and forth like they were struggling to find their place. The mark on my wrist burned hotter. I stumbled, nearly falling to my knees as the pain shot through me. Jules caught me, her grip steady despite the terror in her eyes. "Liv, what's happening?" I shook my head, gritting my teeth against the pain. "I don't know, but it's getting worse." The shadows shifted again, moving closer. I could feel them watching us. "Do you hear that?" Jules whispered. I listened. Whispers, soft, urgent. Too many voices speaking at once, echoing in the space around us. "Don't let it reset. Stop the clock. Run!" The words overlapped, blending into a chaotic chorus that made my head pound. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. "We have to stop it," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Liv, are you sure? Jules's voice was trembling. I wasn't sure, but I could feel it, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The mark on my wrist was a constant reminder that we were running out of time. I took a step toward the clock. The ground shifted beneath me, and the shadows closed in. Jules's grip on my arm tightened, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold surface of the clock. A shock jolted through me, sending a searing pain up my arm. I gasped, but I didn't let go. Liv! Jules' voice was frantic. I have to do this, I whispered, barely able to keep my voice steady. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now. The gears inside the clock spun faster, twitching and jerking with chaotic energy. The shadows closed in. I felt it then, a pull, like the clock was trying to draw me in, like it was demanding something from me. Liv, please, Jules begged, her voice cracking with fear. I'm sorry, I whispered. And then I pushed. The gears stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. The humming ceased, and the air grew still. Did it work? Jules's voice was barely a whisper. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, the ground beneath us trembled. A deep, resonant sound echoed through the space, vibrating through my bones. No, I whispered, dread filling my chest. The gears began to move again, but this time they weren't counting down. They were counting up. Faster. Faster. The shadows surged toward us, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar. Run! I screamed, grabbing Jules's hand. We turned, but there was nowhere to go. The space was shifting, collapsing in on itself. The clock struck once, and the world went white. My head was spinning. I couldn't see. The whiteness was blinding, swallowing everything around us. I felt Jules' hand gripping mine, but even that felt distant, like I was slipping away. Liv? Her voice echoed, distorted, like it was coming from underwater. I'm here, I murmured, though I wasn't sure if the words came out. My body felt weightless, floating in that endless void. The hum was gone, but the silence was worse. It pressed against my ears, making my skin crawl. And then, a heartbeat. I felt it first. A steady, pulsing rhythm that echoed through the space. Not mine. It grew louder, stronger, pounding through my veins. Liv. Jules's voice was clearer now, closer. I'm here, I whispered again, squeezing her hand. The whiteness faded, and we were standing. Back in the clock tower. But it wasn't the same. The air was heavier, thick with something that felt wrong. The gears were turning faster than before. The clock, it was still counting. But the numbers, they didn't make sense. Liv, Jules murmured, her voice trembling. I see it, I whispered. The hands were spinning backward and forward at the same time, flickering between impossible moments. Time was unraveling, twisting in on itself. What did we do? Jules' voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer. Footsteps. Louder this time, coming from the stairs. Someone's coming, Jules breathed. No, I whispered, my chest tightening. Not someone, something. The footsteps echoed, but they weren't right. The rhythm was off, uneven, like whatever was walking didn't understand how to move properly. I felt it before I saw it. The air shifted, cold, wrong. Jules squeezed my hand, her nails digging into my skin. Liv. And then I saw it, emerging from the stairwell. It was me, but it wasn't. The figure had my face, my eyes, but they were hollow, empty. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet with its strings cut. What the? Jules whispered, her voice barely audible. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It smiled. Time doesn't stop, it whispered, my voice, but the sound was distorted, like a recording played backward. Tick. Liv, Jules whispered, her voice shaking. "We have to go," I murmured, barely able to find my voice. But there was nowhere to go. The figure, my reflection, took a step closer. "You started this," it whispered. "I didn't." I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. "You did." Tick. The clock. It was speeding up. The figure 1 was getting closer. "Liv, we need to stop it," Jules cried. "How?" My voice broke. The mark. It was burning again, stronger, angrier. "Liv, your wrist," Jules whispered. I looked down. The symbol was shifting. I felt it then, the choice. "You can stop it," the reflection whispered, "at a cost." Jules' eyes met mine, her face pale with fear. "What does it want?" she whispered. "Time. Live." I knew what it meant. To fix this, I had to give it something. "Don't do it," Jules whispered, her voice trembling. But the clock was running out. I could feel it, the weight of it pressing down on me. "I have to," I murmured, barely able to speak. "Liv, no." Tears filled her eyes, but I was out of choices. I placed my hand over the mark. "Take it," I whispered. A pulse of heat shot through me, and the world trembled. The gears groaned. The clock stopped. For a moment, everything was still, and then it was gone. The figure, the whispers, the unnatural weight in the air. Jules was beside me, her hand still in mine. "Liv?" I blinked, my head spinning. It's over," I whispered, but my voice sounded distant. The clock tower was silent. The gears had stopped, but something felt wrong. Jules helped me to my feet, her eyes scanning the space. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," I murmured. But as I looked at the pedestal where the clock had been, it was empty. My heart pounded in my ears. "Liv," Jules whispered. I followed her gaze. On the wall, a new date. Tomorrow. "No," I whispered, my throat tightening. The clock wasn't gone. It had just reset. And this time, it was counting down to something worse. For more bone-chilling stories, hit subscribe and keep the lights on tonight.